Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Shalom. Good evening and welcome to the Big Daddy Liberty Show. That's right. It is me, Sihle Ngobese, Big Daddy Liberty. Welcome to it. It is another fantastic Wednesday evening, 7 p.m. You know what that means. It means your favorite fat boy is going to join you on your screens. And we're going to have a chat about a topic of the week. Now, this week, I want to look at the latest findings from the Institute of Race Relations. They've been doing polling for the last, at least since 1994, if I'm not mistaken, gauging public opinion on various issues, specifically on race relations issues. And they've just released a very interesting report titled just give me a second here as I look for that title, Critical Race Theory and Race-Based Policy, a Threat to Liberal Democracy. That was penned, of course, by Dr. Anthea Jeffery. We're having some technical difficulties at the moment, and I'm struggling to get Anthea on the line, but I do have with me a familiar face, one who you've seen quite a lot on the BDL show. That, of course, is Gabriel Crouse. Before I bring Gabriel on, just a reminder, please like this stream. Every time you hit that like button, it really does something to the algorithm and it gets the show out to a much wider audience. And whilst you're at it, please share the stream. Share the link. I don't know if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or even on Twitter. Please, I do encourage you to just hit that retweet or share the stream and let's get it out as far as possible. All right. As mentioned before, I am having a bit of trouble getting Anthea on the line, but Gabriel is here. Let me bring him on to the screen right now. Gabriel Crouse from the Institute of Race Relations. Gabriel, hello.
How's it, Sihle? Yeah,
hey, man.
I am Anthea's stand-in tonight. I'm daunted by such large shoes to fill, but I've got you to help me out, so I reckon I'm going to be okay.
Homie, I think you can pull it off quite well, because again, the topic that Anthea unpacks in this report, and I will put the link to it in the descriptor of the video. I just forgot to do that in my mad rush, because I will be putting on screen tables from this particular report so we can go through it in good detail for the viewer, so it isn't a mad scramble for them also in that regard. There's three overarching themes here, and I want to just go into the report itself to refresh my memory insofar as the three questions or the three focus areas that the report itself says it'll unpack and answer and provide further insight, into how ordinary South Africans think. The 4 bullet points, were, it would describe how the two key race-based policies of employment equity, aka affirmative action, and Black economic empowerment have failed to achieve their stated aims whilst actively harming the Black majority. That's the first claim it says it'll set out a case for. The second is provide analysis on the constitutionality of affirmative action and BEE requirements, and it finds a report that is both of them wanting on the test laid out by the Constitutional Court. Of course, the third area in which this report gives insight and analysis is proposing a race-neutral alternative to affirmative action and BEE, which most Black South Africans, it claims, believe would be more effective than affirmative action and BEE. In other words, it'll help them get ahead much better than those two policies. And the last area this report looks at, which I encourage you, dear reader, please read this report. It'll help sharpen your arguments on these issues, that it cautions that this much needed reform, the alternative this report gives, will be harder to achieve because of recent developments in the United States, for example, where critical race theory has moved out of the academia world and into the media, big business, and really into the actual echelons of government. Now, these are 4 wonderful areas covered by the report. Here on this episode, we'll look at some of the key findings in order for me to make the claim that there's a big difference between what we see in the mainstream media, what's within the political elites, and really what comes from our politicians and the academia versus the views of ordinary South Africans, where the former is race obsessed. Hence the things like critical race theory appealing to them, the idea of viewing society through a racial or a gender prism of victims and oppressors, versus ordinary South Africans who don't hold these views and actually are more nuanced and rather moderate. So with that being said, Gabriel, I have a large mouthful. Ordinarily, I'd let Anthea unpack this. Let's get into the findings of this report, which also cites the latest opinion poll. First things first, when did you guys run this particular opinion poll? And what were some of the, because I know what's going to happen in the comment section, opinion polls are never representative, blah, blah, blah. The IR is not scientific anyway. They wouldn't do it according to academic standards. Am I wrong in this? And when exactly was this poll actually commissioned?
November, December last year, it was done. It was commissioned by the IRL before that. We do this kind of thing every couple of years. And have been doing so for 20 years, let's say. And yeah, I understand it when people say polling is BS, because Brexit, the polls predicted that the Remain vote was going to win and that UK was going to remain in EU. But I mean, newsflash, the Leavers won. And so the polling got it wrong. But here is the further detail that that is unscientific to overlook. The polls come with a statistical confidence interval. In the cases of those polls, it is like 2%, 1.5%. So when they said the one party's likely to get, well, the one vote's likely to get 48% and the other one's likely to get 49%, it's within the margin of error. Everyone who reads the numbers properly then says, well, it's too close to call. We don't know. It could go either way. And what happened was the vote was very much 50-50, and the poll said they'd be 50-50. The same is true of the last American election and the American election before. In terms of the popular vote, the pollsters were right within the margin of error 95 times out of the last 100, which is exactly how often you'd expect them to be right. So the mistake to make with polling is if you see 74%, to think it means 74%. 74% actually means 71%, 72%, 75%, 76%, 77%. It means it's somewhere around 3/4, 2/3. It's a huge supermajority. 50% could mean 48%, could mean 52%, but it means roughly half the people. That is an important note to stress. Another important note to stress is the company that we hired, Mark Data, have been doing this for 30 years, and they don't just do this for us. I mean, we're a small fraction of their business. Most of the people that hire them are selling Omo and Oros and SIM cards and sports cars and Jags, all the way up and down the LSM. Companies want to know if their advertising is working. Companies know what kinds of situations their customers find themselves in, how to find a niche, how to find a gap in the market. So most polling is done, hired by companies to figure out the market. And if they were not getting bang for buck, there's no government official making them do this. This is not like when you pay for the pothole to be filled and it doesn't get filled. There's no one to force you. So if you know your company's been hiring this company to tell you what's going on with the minds of people and you don't get a result that actually helps your business, then you're just going to stop paying them. And people haven't stopped paying them. They're paying them more and more over 30 years. So it is a real thing. Now, I've defended the credibility of the polls. What do they say? What happened when we went to ask South Africans, what is your number one and number two priority of a problem? What is the number one problem that this country hasn't resolved since 1994?
And with that being said, just very quickly, Gabriel, Gabriel, for the sake of the audience, as you go into each of these questions, I will put up the results from the report itself on screen so that everybody can see exactly what you're talking about. So that first question, Gabriel, on screen right now.
What is the biggest problem that hasn't been resolved since 1994? Now, take note, the text on top is telling you that we didn't give people a list. We didn't try and prompt them. We didn't try and lead them one way or another. We didn't tell them this is coming from the Institute of Race Relations. We just said, what is the biggest problem in this country that hasn't been resolved? And write one down, then write another one down. And we take those top two. Now, if you look on the total line, there you can see the first line is the total line and the next four are breaking it down by race. But first, let's just look at the total line. And you see that 53% of South Africans said unemployment is the biggest problem that hasn't been resolved. Now, that's not terribly surprising to me. Slightly more, 56% for black people, 52% for white people, for colored people, Indians and whites, a little bit less. But it's in that zone of about half people think that's the big issue. Crime, safety, and security, 22%. Corruption, 18%. Now, corruption, crime, safety, and security are two sides of the same coin. It's basically the criminal justice system, the property rights system. Can you steal from the public purse? Can you steal from the private purse? And in the course of doing that, can you commit violence on someone or rape them, whatever? So you add that together, 22 plus 18, there's 40%. So between unemployment and violation of property rights or criminality, there you've got 90%. We still have a long way to go. Housing, 16%. We have written about the housing issue. Voucher system would make it work. It's not working. Service delivery. Everybody knows about, everybody's experienced some service delivery problem, and we all experience load shedding all the time, which is a kind of service delivery problem. Water and sanitation. Big issue in the rural areas. Also a big issue around major dams that have been poorly treated, like in the Vaal River system, where we had to get the army to come and fix it up, and then guess what? That didn't work either. Education. Now, it's almost a tragedy to me that education ranked so low this time. Usually it's a bit higher. As I say, we do these polls. But I think that people have been so clupped in the last year that they're really feeling, thinking about the future is becoming harder and harder. But there it is. Usually it's higher. There it is. 8%, significant. Poverty, social inequality, 8%. Infrastructure, 6%. Women and children abuse. We really are. The frequency with which a rape occurs in this country is absurd. 3 million children or so have stunted growth because of malnutrition. It's absurd. Okay, 5%. Now we get to land reform, 4%, corrupt leadership, 3%, inequality, 3%, racism and discrimination, 3%. This is not what we prompted. This is what people gave us. Now, if you read the media, the bottom four issues, land reform, corrupt leadership, inequality, inequality, racism and discrimination, that gets 90% of the airtime on the media.
In the mainstream media, of course.
But it gets a fraction of a bite, 4, 3, and 100 of a bite when it comes to ordinary South Africans when they're polled. So I look at this and I think, yep, we've got problems. We've got deep, bad problems. Racism doesn't seem to be one of them. Or if it's one of them, it doesn't seem to be the major problem or even on the top 12 in the list. And we know that when ANC conducts its own polls, you don't trust our polls. What about the ANC guys conducting their own polls to figure out how they can win votes? When they conduct their polls, we know that EWC, land reform, and racism don't fit in the top 12 either.
Absolutely. And again, just if I quickly interject here, because, I think you've made the point quite saliently, and that in terms of that first table, I think that would have inevitably have been the one which we'll spend the most time on. The rest will just be quite brief on.
Yes.
And you, Devio, of course, when you rewatch this, can pause on each table to see the results. But it does speak to, if I were to answer this question, I suppose, of the episode, who actually cares about race and racism and racializing issues the most? Is it the ordinary South African, or really is it the political elite? Or I like to call them the terrible trio. It's the woke academia in this country, the mainstream media, and really politicians and the political elites. Who really cares about racializing everything and viewing things through the prism of race? It clearly isn't the ordinary South African. This does tell us, Gabriel, doesn't it, that ordinary South Africans are actually quite sensible and moderate.
I mean, isn't that your experience? That's my experience. When I walk up and down, I live in a sweet little suburb. I go to buy a cappuccino. Now I live in that kind of suburb. They have cappuccinos. I go there. Everyone is nice to me. And there's black people and white people and Indian people and colored people. And they're just trying to live their lives. And they're getting along nicely with one another. And if ever there is an issue, it's because someone, is smoking tick on the side of the road. It's a drug issue. Crime.
But
if I go into rural South Africa, it's even more the case that the ordinary people that get left out of the spotlight are desperately keen to not racialize the issues. I told you last time I was in Piet Retief, there was this Zulu traditional leader who, with tears in his eyes, was weeping, pleading with people, please don't listen. At that funeral, they were saying, you mustn't, if you work for a white man, you're in Pimpi, it's us against them. He was crying, saying, please don't ever believe that. Please don't ever tell someone that. Don't ever think that. No one wants to talk to him. He's just a common South African like you and me.
Sorry, I was about to say, to that point, I'm actually going to put up table 2 because we're speaking to it now, where you asked South Africans in this poll the question, have race relations improved since 1994? And here's the data.
So this one is troubling, hey? If you look at the here we have given them options. We've said, have race relations improved is the question. Then you can say improved, stayed the same, became worse. Yeah. Now, I think it's very distressing that 25% of the country think they became worse. 24% of black people, 29% of colored people, 27% of Asian people, 35% of white people. That is distressing because it's since 1994. Now, I will say, this is the kind of result that makes me try and get into the minds of people who are going to have different minds and different reasons of explaining what they think. And I think some of those reasons won't be great. But here's an interesting reason. If you look at race relations in 1994, it's very different to race relations in 1984. In 1994, people, the white electorate with a supermajority had voted for a referendum to end apartheid. Nelson Mandela was a beloved hero for many, many South Africans, for the majority of South Africans, the super majority of South Africans. It seemed like black and white, Indian and colored, with some extremists and definitely some dark stuff happening in the People's War, but that by and large, the country was hugely enthused by this belief that now we can treat one another as equals. So I think maybe some people who think stayed the same or became worse have this picture of 94 not being apartheid, 94 being an interesting kind of glorious moment. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. But for sure, 41%, the plurality, the largest proportion of people looking at these results, looking at this question, said that they've definitely improved. And if you look at, across the racial breakdown, it stays pretty much the same. So I think that's an encouraging finding. I think it's also a disturbing finding. I think that's the kind of finding that makes us look back and try and rethink things maybe, and also to look forward and worry. I mean, if people think things are becoming worse, how are they going to respond to that? Can we actually hold the society together? Don't know. Not without reform. Yeah.
Yeah, but here's the thing. It also does speak to the fact that people aren't blind also to what they read and hear about in the mainstream media. I mean, perception does matter. And this sort of question speaks to, it almost puts that cognitive dissonance, if you will, between the individual's personal sense of wanting to answer this question versus also what they read, see, and hear on a day-to-day basis in the media in which they consume. So I'm not surprised, I suppose, by the mixed bag, but the next question is a dead giveaway for me in terms of bringing out that difference between the personal, what I've personally experienced as a South African and my day-to-day, and arguably the broader sense of things as is fed to me by the media, where I'm told, for example, that things are not improving or they're getting worse, or that a single incident of racism somewhere is symptomatic of the whole country. That conflict is brought up between, for me, in the next one, where the question was asked, have you personally experienced any form of racism over the past 5 years? And look at those numbers.
Look at those numbers. I mean, I don't think anyone who's ever been on Twitter can fail to look at that and it's just it's breathtaking to me. 80% of South Africans and 81% of Black South Africans say that they haven't personally experienced any form of racism over the past 5 years.
Exactly.
That's just, it's kind of flabbergasting. And look, I don't want to overlook the fact that racism is a problem. People have experienced racism there. You can see that. And you can see when you look around, there are incidents. But 80%, I mean, it's huge. It's good. It really is good. I think in this country, oh man, Sihle, sometimes I feel like we allow the left in particular to dominate and monopolize ideas. And one of the things I've noticed, for example, talking about BEE, is that BEE proponents on the left never say that it's worked. They always say it's not working. That's why we have to do more of it. Something like that. And it's weird because if you look at the numbers, actually, white people went from earning 85% of income 25 years ago to earning 30%, 33% of income now, or in 2015, which is when you have the latest data. That is because a huge increase took place in the opportunities for Black people. And as a result, income increased. So there's something to celebrate, but they don't celebrate it. I think we should celebrate the fact that we have done important things as a country. And one of those important things is to secure an environment where 80% of people report that they haven't experienced racism of any form in the last 5 years. And by the way, if you worry that this is a one-off result, we've asked this question and cognates of this question before, and this is one of the most persistent surprises. It happens every time, and every time I'm like, oh my word, it happened again.
And let's drill into this, because again, I must repeat this point. It exposes Shakespeare spoke a lot about this idea of appearances versus reality. And again, for me, the appearance is what is sold to us by the mainstream media, the political elites, politicians, and of course, woke academia, who are the loudest voice in the room. They control, print, radio, TV, and the like. So, of course, they're the loudest voice in the room. They can create the appearance. But the reality is what South Africans in small towns, dorpies across this country, in our communities and urban centers and our metros, the reality is a very different one. The next question for me and the results brings that dichotomy out even more clearly. And let me put it up on screen. Oopsie daisy. Lost my place there. Bear with me, dear viewer. There it is. No, excuse me. Pardon me, I've lost. There we go. This is.
That's the one. You had it.
Yeah,
you had it. There
here's
we go.
the one. The question really was framed in the context, therefore, of, with this talk of racism and colonialism, is it done by politicians who are trying to find excuses for their own failures? Look at how South Africans are easily and ably able to see past the ruse and say, yeah, sorry, I butchered that question a little bit, but
let me
go back to the report.
If I can, Sihle, if I can come in here and just say, here's how I look at this question. And this again is a question that we've asked before, and we've gotten similar results. In fact, we got even higher numbers the last time. I think of even older than Shakespeare is a European folk tale. Cultures, everybody comes with their stories to teach children about morality. And there's a nice old folk tale that I remember learning when I was in grade 1 called The Emperor's New Clothes. And there was this naked guy. This emperor wanted a new fancy thing, and he was a bit crazy. And so this dressmaker came and said, here is the most beautiful dress in the whole universe. And he was just holding nothing but air. And the emperor said, oh, really? And he says, yes. And only stupid people can't see it. So I'm sure you can see it and see how beautiful it is. And the emperor says, oh, yes, I can see it's very beautiful. Let me put it on. And he puts it on, and now he's really just walking around butt naked. And he says to his chief advisor, do you like my new garment? Only stupid people can't see it, but it's the best, most beautiful thing in the world. And of course, this guy knows that if he says you can't see it, he'll admit that he's stupid in the emperor's eyes, and then he'll be executed. So he says, oh, no, that's wonderful. And so on with the next one and the next one. And eventually the emperor's parading around town, and everyone says, how beautiful his new clothes are. But then a small child starts laughing because from the mouths of babes come truth. And he says, no, he's not wearing a nice thing. He's naked. It's a fabrication. You guys are just living in a myth. He's clearly naked. We can see. And then everyone starts laughing. And there's kind of a happy ending in one of the versions of the story. To me, when I look at this, it's like at least half of South Africans can see that the emperor is naked. It's not one little child. It's the majority of the country can see that all this talk of racism and colonialism is by politicians who are trying to cloak themselves in an outfit that will conceal their deep moral inner corruption, their capacity in this country of poverty, after this country's amazing struggles through adversity, in this situation, to steal money from the poor, to steal from PPE procurement so that you can drive a BMW the next day, to not just steal for yourself, but to set up an entire system of stealing so that, in fact, if you are in the political network elite and you don't steal, then you get frozen out like Kgalema Motlanthe. And if you do steal like Tony Ngeni and you go to jail because you were too silly to avoid getting caught, don't worry, you'll come back and we will re-elevate you and we'll even appoint you to be the commissioner of internal corruption investigation within the ANC. I mean, it is absurd. And half of the country can see through that.
Absolutely. Which again brings us to moving the conversation along. We're hitting that half an hour mark. Usually the show ends here, but I did anticipate that it would run over time a bit. So it's going to be a 45-minute show. I am in conversation with Gabriel Crouse from the Institute of Race Relations, unpacking their recent polling study and report, which basically looks at the issue of, excuse me, Gabriel, I actually need to sneeze. Oh, there we go.
Mazel tov.
We're looking at their recent report, Critical Race Theory and Race-Based Policy, a Threat to Liberal Democracy. And we're just going through the report. And we're at that point now, as I said, where the report then begins to ask questions of what is the root, therefore, if we all agree, and we all see that, this is a society of the appearance versus reality, if you will. The appearance that everything is racist, everything is bad, blah, 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 as politicians, the mainstream media, and of course woke academia tells us, versus ordinary South Africans who, on a day-to-day basis, realize that this is all nonsense and that actually there are other issues which are top of mind for them, issues which are much more sensible, unemployment, crime, etc., that those are actually the issues that matter the most. The question we then asked, or at least the IRR asked, was what is the root, therefore, for sound race relations in the country? And this was a very interesting one for me because, and let me just put it back on screen, because it you then framed, if the public was saying jobs, education were higher priorities, the question was, with better education and more jobs, would the present inequality between races steadily disappear? Do people agree, disagree, or neither of those two options? And again, the numbers are absolutely staggering.
Yeah. A supermajority, more than a supermajority, 73%. Now, as I said, 73.4 is a bit meaningless, but it's somewhere in the 70s, A serious majority of South Africans think that is a true claim. And some of them neither agree nor disagree. I wonder what they're thinking. Maybe they're taking a philosophical line. But go back to the first line. Look at those who agree. 73% agree. Now, if you break that down by race, 72.5% of Black people agree. It's the same. 80% of colored people agree. It's basically the same. 78% of Asian people agree. It's the same. 72% of white people agree. It's the same. There is a broad consensus across these spheres of society. And by the way, if you look further into the numbers, we make sure that these polls are demographically representative. So that means we've also got breakdowns by income and the like. And you find much the same consensus across various incomes there too. But just looking at across race, there's this perfect consensus that what we need, insofar as we have this lingering racial problem, what you need to solve that problem is better education and more jobs. And I don't know that if you have this table lined up, Sihle, but we then asked quite specifically two questions, one about jobs and the other one about education. And there we found very exciting results for the project of non-racialism as well.
All right, before we get to that one, let me just put the next table up, Matt, as well, because it dispels this idea, that South Africa is at the cusp of a race war, that somehow blacks and whites are just ready to kill each other because we disagree. For instance, look at what happened in Piet Retief when the politicians descended on the town. They played up the idea that there is this massive difference in wants and desires between black and white South Africans. This next table dismisses this insofar as arguing and asks the question: do the different races need each other for progress and for there being a realization of full opportunity for all? Again, overwhelming supermajority numbers in this regard. Gabriel, just as we close this one off.
Yeah, and if you look, there's a very interesting poll. One of the first polls wasn't actually done by the IRR. I think it was done by the Helen Suzman Foundation or something, or commissioned by, in 2000. They're somewhere around there. They asked the question, do you think apartheid was basically a good idea? Like badly implemented, but it's a good idea for the races to go separately because they don't need to work together for progress. In other words, it's the opposite to this question. Can the races go forward? Is it better? Is it a good idea for the races to try and go separately? Apartheid. Most South Africans said yes. Black, white, Indian, colored. So things have changed. Things have changed. Now, 71% of South Africans, or 75, whatever it is, let's say 3/4. 3/4 of South Africans say, you know what? We need each other. We need to work together in order to achieve what we all want. That, to me, is a sign of something that here's another word that's been so monopolized and then discredited that it doesn't get used anymore. Nation building. There is such a thing as growing proud of your citizenship, as you say, connecting to your flag. This new flag that we were both alive when it was invented, it is something that people have grown an attachment to. And that attachment for many has eroded the kind of race solidarity or loyalty that once held that kind of place of the definition of the community that you belong to. We as South Africans appreciate, the supermajority of us, we need each other to work together, to go forward together. I think that is extremely encouraging. I worry about the 8 to 10% who say we don't need each other. And again, you see that across all races. And those numbers are ticking up just a little bit, which is worrying to me. Again, a story about, the common sense South African got good values, but not beyond being influenced. So we watch those numbers very carefully. But the overwhelming majority gives us a very, very positive message, and one that's completely at odds with the political line.
Oh, and let's speak to that, because the political line, of course, is to listen to what we're saying, recognize that this is reality, but because they dominate as I said, they're the loudest voice in the room, they want to keep beating the drum that actually no, race is what matters, both in terms of South Africa being a fundamentally racist society of oppressors and victims, and of course, to fix this, a need for a race-based and a racialized policy approach to things. And we've just made the argument here and shown the data that South Africans disagree with this. But then you guys asked the question, how do ordinary South Africans therefore see policies like employment equity or affirmative action and BEE? If they agree that race-based policies are trash or a problem, how do they actually then see when politicians enact this approach in policy terms, i.e. BEE? And one of the questions you guys asked is, what would be the best way, therefore, to improve people's lives? And I'm going to put this table up. This is table 7 from the report, because it really just shone a light into how sensible South Africans really are. Gabriel, do you want to talk us through this one?
Look at that, hey? Best paper. So here and just to be clear, remember in the very first one, we didn't give a list. We just said, write down what you want or say what you want, because it was a conversation where people were visited. With this one is no, you've got options here. And your options are more jobs and better education, better service delivery, more BEE and affirmative action in employment, or more land reform. And if South African citizens were the same proportionally as Parliament, then you would have 75% of Parliament saying more BEE and more land reform, and maybe 25% saying more jobs and better education and better service delivery. And this is, you must pick one. Hey, you can't say all of them are important. You've got to pick one. But ordinary South Africans, 72% picked more jobs and better education. That ranks, compare 72% with 3%. That's think about that ratio. It's like how many times does 3 go into 72? 12. It's 12 to 1. 12 times more people think that more jobs and better education are the best way to improve lives than those who think you need more BE and affirmative action. And there's a similar ratio to more land reform. So, and again, if we then go along the chart and see the racial breakdown, for more jobs and better education, 72%, overall 71.9% for Black people, 77.4% for colored people, 78.7% for Asian people, 74% for white people. So again, it's all more or less the same, all kind of
absolutely
in the same zone.
We're testing this notion that's often put to us in the mainstream that, oh no, they'll tell us, South Africans, particularly Black South Africans, are heavily in favor of a racial approach to fixing the ills of the past. And we're putting these notions to ordinary people, and we're getting a different result. Specifically, how these ideas, racialized ideas by politicians, translate into the actual policies they've put into the state mechanism, i.e. employment equity and BEE. We're testing whether the ordinary South African agrees with the politician that these are the policies that will create this nirvana that we're told by socialist politicians is coming if we use race to fix things. Because the next table is very instructive in this regard, in the sense that it looks at the jobs element. The one thing that we've all saw in the data, all South Africans overwhelmingly view as a first priority. But it asks the question, how should these jobs be accorded, or rather, what mechanism is the best way of creating these jobs? Should they be racialized also? Do you want to take over here, Gabriel?
Yeah. This is exactly what you just said, Sihle. We've gone from the sort of more abstract, these broader categories, and now we're getting to the specific solution-oriented side of things. Asking ordinary South Africans, okay, you've described your problem, and I'm saying unemployment is abstract as a problem in the sense that millions of people are unemployed, and they all have very immediate and personal problems, but it's so different that they kind of fit within this broader box. But now, what do you specifically and precisely do to solve that problem? Okay, one option is only Blacks get appointed for a long time ahead. 5.1% agree, 5.9% of Black people agree, and 4.6% of white people agree. So it's basically 5% of white people and Black people think that only Black people should be appointed for a long time ahead. I think what's partly interesting about that result is you see the fact that the same proportion of Black people think this as white people. And I know, I feel like I know these people, Sizle, because I have gone to Parliament and because I have hung out with the elite Twitterati at Santon Dews. And they, a lot of these white guys are like, their job is to get paid by companies to go around and tell them not to hire white people. Pay me to tell you that I'm the last white person you should ever pay. Or that other white guy who wrote in News 24, white people should never say anything in public. But he's okay. So there's this it exists. There is this fringe. There's this fringe. There it is. See it for what it is. It's not nothing. It's definitely not the majority. It's not even a minority. Okay. It's not even a serious minority. Okay. So only Blacks should be appointed until we achieve demographic representativity. Now, the reason that matters is, and I wish Dr. Anthea Jeffery was here because she is a trained lawyer and legal scholar, Dr. Anthea Jeffery. She can walk you through this much more succinctly than I can. So I'm just going to summarize and say, check out the report and I'll work on this for further details. But the goal, the underpinning goal of BEE and EE is representativity, is demographic representativity. And this filters through ANC documents, it filters through white papers, it filters through actual wording of legislation. So this is BEE. How many people want that? 11%. Appointment on merit with special training for the disadvantaged. 60% of people want that. I think I want that. I think everyone who gets the job should get it on merit, but the disadvantaged. And now disadvantaged doesn't mean the children of elite politicians or media moguls or whatever. This means people who actually, come from orphanages, who had to go to rubbish government schools, who have parents who struggle to make ends meet if they are lucky enough even to have two parents. Disadvantaged people in this country are the overwhelming majority of, especially young people, I mean, of the whole country, but when you're talking about employment, especially of the youth, and they need extra training. So I think there's a great option. 60% of South Africans agree, and 21% of South Africans go even further, saying all appointments should be based on merit alone without such training. So added together, and it's 80% of South Africans think that appointments should be based on merit, and then most of those think plus put in some extra training, but 80% think employment on merit, and 15% think that only Black people should be employed, or that you should follow the BEE model of further and further interventions by government in the system until you reach demographic representativity.
And again, the findings are absolutely crystal clear insofar as what they are demonstrating ordinary South Africans are saying. And that is, there is overall very little popular support for the employment equity policies as shoved down our throats by politicians. And of course, BEE policies, which are shoved also down our throats by the political elite, so that we realize as ordinary South Africans that employment equity and BEE, and this is a realization across the races, is for the elites. It is benefiting the elites. And there is a big difference between what I, ordinary Joe Soap, living in a shack on a sand dune in Cape Town, my famous example, get to experience versus what that young Black chap who went to St. John's or St. Stithians, the creme de la creme of schools in this country. There's a difference between these two chaps, even though both are Black. One recognizes, especially the poor one who's currently disadvantaged, he recognizes that he is not the target market for a policy like employment equity or Black economic empowerment, regardless of the illusion of it being for Blacks and, as the ANC puts it, Africans in particular. He recognizes that he's not the beneficiary of that, especially as those politicians drive past him in flashy Mercedes-Benzes and he is walking, looking for an opportunity, or walking to the nearest post office to try and get his 350 a temporary grant from. Again, this issue resonates on a personal level with me, because we're destroying the quality of life of people in the name of doing it for Black people, as the politicians would have us believe. It registers on a very personal level.
No, I hear you, man.
I
No, speak it out.
A little emotional because I cannot tell you, Gabriel, how much I need to fight these bad ideas in the public sphere, and how heartbreaking it can also be watching ordinary South Africans, the faith, flag, family, and freedom type South African, who so drummed in with these ideas from the mainstream, begins to believe that bullshit. And I'm sorry, I don't swear on my channel, but this is one of those issues that really resonates. Ordinary people are beginning to believe the loudest voices, even though I can tell you now, talk to the fellow South African and you realize that what we're being fed by politicians, what we're being fed by the media, what we're being fed by woke academia is just simply not reality. Simply not reality. And this is what I walk into communities to fight and literally push the ideas of. And we're going to, sorry to cut you off there, Gabriel, but the notion of ideas and alternatives is where we're going to go, because this report also spoke to that. Of, okay, fine, if there's no popular support for the race-based and racialized approach, what alternative therefore exists? And I'm often asked this by people on my show and on the question section, and we're going to get into that right now.
Okay, but before you do, I want to say one thing about you, Sihle.
Sure.
The reason you are an inspiration. You do get emotional about this now and then. You think about this now and then. But what is it that it takes for you to go into communities and fight this battle of ideas? It takes a bit of courage, and it takes a lot of caring. And I think that what is crushing this country is a climate of fear. It takes courage, because it is scary to literally say the most popular and commonsensical thing that you can. Racism is not the problem. The problem is politicians using that as an excuse to hide their own failures, encroaching in on business, crushing jobs, destroying education through terrible union practices, and getting in the way of our ability, ordinary South Africans, to work together, to create together, and to make a better future for ourselves and for our families. This is it. That is an outrageous thing to say in this country. It is outrageous to make sense. And the only reason that happens is because we, as South Africans, have put so much trust in politicians that they have taken that trust and then terrified us with it.
Absolutely.
And we need to take it back. We need to take back the public square. It needs to be normal to say the commonsensical and reasonable thing. And the people who should feel a little bit nervous, I'm not saying nervous for their lives or for their security at all, but nervous that they're going to be criticized, are people or canceled, are people who say that you need to look at someone's skin tone to figure out whether they went to St. John's and UCT and grew up with a silver spoon in their mouth, or whether they grew up in a homeless shelter or in an orphanage, because skin tone ain't going to tell you that. People who say that it can, I mean, they are detached from reality, and they should be, I don't know, you should help them out sometimes, but if they're going to really try and push it, then you must criticize them.
Absolutely.
That's how it should be. We should, and this is, I think the biggest thing that our research can do is let you know that you're not alone. You're a South African out there listening to us. You see Sihle, he's a brave and charismatic guy. He can do it, but so can you, because you're not alone.
And that last bit you said, this is the data that you can use to marshal this argument in your own space, dear viewer, so that it isn't just like, oh, watch Big Daddy Liberty or whatever. No. You in your own space can marshal the facts, the data, because it's right here in this report. I'll make it available. But as I was saying, if we've now shown quite ably, and the data is shown quite ably, that policies like, firstly, racialism and racializing everything is not popular in this country. South Africans are much more sensible than the politicians would have us believe. Therefore, the notion of everything being racialized insofar as how we've seen it in policy, affirmative action, BEE and the like, also not popular. So what therefore is, or what could be popular? What is an alternative? If we're saying we should be a non-racial society, remember I always say this in the show, we need to be a prosperous, free, non-racial and property-owning society. What does it look like? What would it look like, therefore, for policy to be non-racial, non-racial and gear us towards being prosperous and property-owning? This is where this report gives you those tools. And I'm going to put the table 9 up, Gabriel. We're in the last 10 minutes, so I'm going to ask us to be brief because people can't go through this report themselves. And I've said this before, just to set it out. The state can play a role in uplifting people, but it must uplift people not because they're black, they're white, they're colored, they're Indian. No. The state must uplift people and empower them because they're poor and they need an opportunity, a step up, if you will. What are some of the best policy approaches to giving people a step up? Well, vouchers is one such way where, and Gabriel, I'm going to let you unpack this one and obviously some of the results here.
Okay, so the voucher idea is if the government's going to pay for something, a lot of people just think that means the government also has to produce it.
Yeah.
No, that's not how it works. The government can pay for it and a company can produce it. So you can have a school that is vying for business. But the way it gets business is you, as a parent, go to the government, you get a voucher. That means you've got money, but you can only spend it at a school. And then you go and spend that money in that school. Then the government pays the school, and then that school gets cash just like any other private school that it can spend on buildings and teachers and syllabus and textbooks and whatever it wants. Now, the voucher system has been tried. We've got good research coming through Anthea Jeffery that she cites of a guy called James Tully, who's been studying this around the world. India, which is much poorer than South Africa. It's especially large swathes of it. They've tried this voucher system. Nigeria, harsh parts of Nigeria, even war-torn places like South Sudan, Eritrea, this system has worked. Kenya, Tanzania, the system has worked where it's been tried. In America especially, it's been tried a lot. It's worked a lot. Okay. Now, not all South Africans know that, but you explain the voucher idea to South Africans. So you say, instead of you have to send your kids to that school, you can get a voucher and then you can send it to any school where the school's going to get paid the same amount that school gets paid, but then that way they compete. 77% of South Africans say they like that. 79% of black South Africans like that. Only 65% of white South Africans like that. It is one of the most popular, it's the single most popular policy idea from our polling. South Africans, and you know it if you've been into the heartlands, into the townships, into rural South Africa. If you want to see people, if you want to see a cloud come over a happy space, ask a parent who's in a good mood what they feel about their child's school. You will often hear, this is nice and that's nice, and you say, and tell me that other bit that you're hiding, and people will tell you sob story after sob story after sob story. That has been my universal experience, a tragic and universal experience. Desperate parents want to get through it. Now, that's the biggest one. Then you look at tax-funded healthcare voucher system, the same thing. You get low-cost private guys. I mean, they're not going to be selling medicine like they do in the fanciest hospitals in Sandton, but they're going to be using the same amount of money that government hospitals do and offering a better service. That's not what we said to our interviewees. We just said, would you like tax-funded healthcare vouchers to buy medical aid and or health insurance? Yes, 73%, no, 19%. And again, very much more popular amongst Black and and colored South Africans than amongst white South Africans. Would you like tax-funded housing vouchers to build, buy, rent your own home? Millions of people sitting on the housing queue, waiting for that RDP house, knowing that when it comes, there's a fat chance it's going to be built like rubbish. Instead, you could get the value of that voucher and then go and pay a constructor to do it. Everyone wants that. 72%, again, 75% amongst Black people, 54% amongst white people, I think because half of them don't understand the issue. Would tax-funded vouchers for education, healthcare, and housing help you get more effectively than current BEE and affirmative action policies? Sihle, yes, 72%.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, pitting the non-racial alternative against the current racial reality, and the overwhelming majority of South Africans say absolutely, we will take the non-racial way, the way in which it focuses on uplifting the poor and giving them the best opportunity of escaping their poverty and becoming a middle income and prosperous country.
And uplifting the poor by relying on private enterprise, where the government's role is to collect taxes and then redirect them towards the poor, but not where the government's role is to hire and run the companies called Eskom, SAA, the healthcare company, the local public school. No, people don't want that. They want they want tax money to actually go to themselves, rather than
themselves. Absolutely.
Rather than go to feathering the nests of blatantly corrupt politicians.
Absolutely. And it's funny we should say this. This will be the final point because we must wrap up. It's instructive that we do this episode today. I'm going to do a vlog about it tomorrow. The chairperson of the Health Professionals Council of South Africa. This is the body that oversees doctors, dietitians, dentists, blah, blah, blah. It's a state mandated regulatory body. The chairperson in Parliament yesterday basically suggested that, you know what, and this, by the way, is a doctor, an elite, quite a rich person themselves. He says, you know what, actually what we would like to see as the HPSCA, or butchered that, but in any event, Health Professionals Council, is the nationalization of healthcare, and actually, and he says this much, taking money from those private medical schemes and putting it into one big pot called the National Health Insurance, and of course having the state run healthcare in this country. And any South African listening to this, especially in the context of the data we've just given you now, would have heard this and said, so you want to make healthcare, or an Eskom rather, of healthcare, where it is one provider of electricity by way of Eskom, and now under the NHI, one provider of healthcare. Ordinary South Africans, if you take what we just shared with you in this data, we'll look at this and say, not a chance. Rather take the money that the state spends on healthcare right now, break it up into vouchers, give it to me, the parent of the household, and I can go to Discovery or Momentum or whoever and buy medical aid for myself and my family. That's realistic, or a rational, approach. And why I'm saying the state can play a role in opportunity, but really it's to allow the private sector and accord the private sector, the space to provide just the same quality that currently is being enjoyed by the middle class and rich people. Why not extend that to poor people, as opposed to suggesting that poor people must come and get what is currently given instead of suggesting that rich and middle class people should come down and get what is currently provided for to the poor, which is a substandard service. So we're saying, of course not. What you want is to bring the poor to enjoy the high quality that is currently enjoyed by political elites, really, and just more middle class people. Gabriel,
if I can finish in one sentence.
Last word, because we've run out of time.
So, Dr. Anthony Jeffrey briefed me before this, and she used the phrase leveling down. Some people think the solution is to level down, to cut the tall poppy, so that everyone comes down to the same level. This is what you were just describing with the NHI. Now, those people do not represent the best interests of most South Africans, and they haven't got them fooled. What most South Africans want is to level up. And yes, any leveling up system is going to mean some guys go further than others. But South Africans want that chance. And this is what our data shows. It shows that the confluence of socialism in the sense of further expanding government control of the means of production and race nationalism in the sense of codifying people within a society according to their race so that ultimately you geared toward first-class and second-class citizens. Those two big ideas are resoundingly rejected. And the common sense middle ground is being held by South Africans. This is the good news. The bad news is most people are doing this quietly, privately, in a state of fear. And the only way to break that is if we start speaking our minds out loud in public.
Absolutely. That is Gabriel Crouse from the Institute of Race Relations. I have just put the thank you to him, by the way. My apologies for Gabriel there, but thank you very much for joining us. The show is an hour-long show. Apologies for that, but I think it's a good 1 hour. Please share the link to the show and give us a like, guys, so that the algorithm can do its thing and push the show out as far as possible. With that being said, thanks for watching. I did put a link to the report in the comment section. You should see it there, but I'll also put it in the descriptor of this video. As I said, this report gives you the hard data that allows you to marshal the arguments in your own space. The arguments that convince other people that actually, yes, it is possible to create a prosperous, free, non-racial and property-owning South Africa. You don't have to go down the route of race and racialism. You don't have to embrace the toxic ideas of critical race theory as is preferred by the political elites, politicians, mainstream media, and woke academia. That it's actually possible to create a liberty-leaning society, one defined by those values of faith, flag, family, and freedom. So with that being said, goodness me, I'm fired up this one on tonight. With that being said, thank you for watching, guys. Now you see what ideas I'm pushing into communities in terms of my advocacy work. Those voucher ideas in particular are exactly what I'm pushing into poor communities across the country and saying, stand with us on these ideas and push back and push for them in our society. So shout out to you for watching. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. Remember, leave a like and share the link to the show. Super appreciate that too. And a reminder to you as I leave that you should never trust a commie